En el centro de la pampa vive un pimiento. Sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento. Sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Patrick Asch. Aujourd'hui, on va visiter la Falaise Saint-Jacques avec Monsieur Patrick Asch. Patrick Asch a lutté pendant longtemps pour un grand succès ici à Montréal. Ça s'appelle le Parc des Rapides. Il va être notre guide aujourd'hui. Hello, I'm Patrick Barnard. It's May 7th, 2016. We are going to visit the Falaise Saint-Jacques, the Saint-Jacques Escarpment. We're going to go on a citizen's walk led by Mr. Patrick Asch. He's the former head of Héritage Laurentien, probably the man who's single-handedly responsible for achieving a great thing here in Montreal, which is called the Parc des Rapides. So, let's go now to the Falaise Saint-Jacques. Alors, Patrick, vous êtes le guide pour d'aujourd'hui, vous attendez les gens. C'est quoi l'importance de la falaise?
La Falaise Saint-Jacques, c'est un milieu qui a un potentiel de devenir extrêmement intéressant pour faire des activités récréatives et pour la biodiversité pour Montréal. C'est dans un secteur où il y a un manque d'espaces verts et les espaces verts sont un élément important pour la qualité de vie de Montréal, pour les résidents autour. Donc, redonner éventuellement un accès formel à la Falaise Saint-Jacques va redonner une qualité de vie pour les résidents d'NDG, Saint-Raymond, pour les résidents aussi du Sud-Ouest. Une fois que tout est relié ensemble avec d'autres espaces, ça va aussi augmenter la diversité biologique. Petit Bourgogne, Verdun, moi je suis de la salle.
Pour éclairer le passage.
English, one group in French, un groupe en français, puis après ça, Serge, on s'échangera. Parfait, All right, let's go. Follow me, everyone. As Montreal developed, at one point this area was considered kind of a waste area, and they used it to dump their excess materials. So you'll see a lot of brick, a lot of old stone, you'll see soil, and all that was dumped on the falaise. And then eventually, about 25, 30 years ago, they decided that they had to stabilize the area. They built a road, they built a path all along the edge or midway on it, and they started planting things. But in those days, they weren't as conscious about species and native species and biodiversity. So many of the species they actually planted are non-native. They're species that are in some cases called invasives. There's a concept that's been talked about a lot more in scientific research lately called connectivity. And there's statistical analysis of how to increase connectivity for various green spaces and for communities to walk, so either for humans or for wildlife. In order to create greenways for wildlife, we have to think of using some of the parts that are available by leaving islands of vegetation that's more natural, so that wildlife can then travel through from one area to the next. On the other end, as the falaise curves and turns in, it's only a little over a kilometer to reach Meadowbrook grounds. Meadowbrook is 57 hectares. It's a fairly large site. It has a huge potential as well. It's something that's worth considering as well. So we have to look at everything. We have to look at its potentials. And this comes to me as a perfect, in Montreal, if we look at the areas that were the most victims of industrialization, southwestern Montreal is pretty much what suffered through the most. It's where all the urbanization developed first. It's worker class communities for the most part originally, and it was developed around plants and highways and train tracks. Essentially, it's where there's a need more for what is coined in the States. It's very common in the States, but really not a term that you hear much in Montreal or in Canada, which is environmental justice. There's a need to give back to the communities that have suffered the most from industrialization. In New York, what they did in 2010, if you have a chance, go online and listen to a TED Talk by Majora Carter.
Hunts Point Riverside Park became the first waterfront park that the South Bronx had had in more than 60 years. We leveraged that $10,000 seed grant more than 300 times into a $3 million park.
She's a person who worked to reopen an area called the South Bronx, reopen the shorelines and make them accessible. And through pressure from community groups like Sauvons la Falaise, but in New York, they essentially convinced the city to down the road invest in creating a greenway along the South Bronx.
But those of us living in environmental justice communities are the canary in the coal mine. We feel the problems right now and have for some time. Environmental justice, for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, goes something like this. No community should be saddled with more environmental burdens and less environmental benefits than any other. Unfortunately, race and class are extremely reliable indicators as to where one might find the good stuff, like parks and trees, and where one might find the bad stuff, like power plants and waste facilities.
They convinced the community to remove a section of highway and build paths. So they actually spent in 2010 $50 million to do this. And similar projects were done in New Orleans, similar projects were done in many other cities around the world where we said, look, these areas where communities live need to have these green spaces.
That small park I told you about earlier was the first stage of building a greenway movement in the South Bronx. I wrote a $1.25 million federal transportation grant to design the plan for a waterfront esplanade with dedicated on-street bike paths.
But over here, right more or less to the west of the Falaise and along the river, what's become, we call now more the Rivière Saint-Pierre, more or less probably located where towards Meadowbrook. There's indications that there was a settlement for Aboriginal communities, Mohawk communities, or Iroquoian communities. Now, this area here indicates that, but there was probably other uses along the way, and there were probably other communities using much of the area.
La visite sur la falaise avec Patrick Asch fait partie de tout un effort de sauvegarder la Falaise Saint-Jacques, un effort mené par le groupe de citoyens qui s'appelle Sauvons la Falaise. Suite à la visite, le conseil communautaire de NDG et Sauvons la Falaise ont rassemblé les citoyens 3 semaines plus tard, le 1er juin, dans l'église Trinity Memorial sur la rue Sherbrooke à Montréal. Lisa Mintz de Sauvons la Falaise est en train de construire une coalition pour la falaise et pour un vrai tram verte à Montréal. Dans l'église, elle a adressé les gens avec Patrick Asch, et Patrick Asch a souligné l'importance de l'implication des citoyens. Donc, le travail pour avoir une vraie falaise et un vrai tram verte pour tout le monde continue.
So what we're trying to do here is create green connections, the land vert, between Meadowbrook, along the Falaise, down to Parc Avignon, Douglas, Parc de Rapide, and all along the coast there of Montreal Island.
Le but de ce soir, c'est de parler de connectivité des espaces verts et de faire des liens entre les espaces verts. Par exemple, de Meadowbrook jusqu'à la Falaise, de Montréal, par Pimento, le Douglas, tout ça pour essayer, par des cyclables, pour essayer de faire de la connectivité parce que c'est particulièrement important d'avoir cette connectivité-là pour la biodiversité.
Greenway concept that will link the various green spaces throughout southwestern Montreal. So we have the Falaise Saint-Jacques, the escarpment itself. We have Meadowbrook grounds. We have green spaces that go along the train tracks. It would be interesting to create a path towards Mount Royal. It would be interesting to create a path towards Avignon Park. Maybe 2 different areas using the old train tracks that are not being used on the other side in LaSalle and southwestern Montreal. And we could have access to all the waterfront. But in order for this to go forward, for concepts like this to go forward, there has to be interest shown from members of the community. There has to be a willingness to go forward with a project, and the city will not do that if nobody says, we want this to go forward.
En el centro de la pampa vive un pimiento, sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento. sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento.